Tafsir Surah Al-A'raf. If I can just ask everyone to please mute themselves at the very beginning. Last time in the video, there were some issues from background noise, so that would be really appreciated. Okay. So I wanted to thank, first of all, everyone for their incredible reflections. It was a wonderful learning experience for me personally, reading some of the reflections that we received. Some of those that really stood out for me personally was the one from Sister Zahra, where she talked about the connection between a lack of gratitude and the culture of consumerism and materialism that we actually find ourselves in, and how our society is built to want to consume more and to want to get the next new thing and to get the latest and newest edition and version of the whole myriad of items that are out there. And so it's really hard to strike a balance between constantly being bombarded by new options and also maintain gratitude for what you already have. So I thought that was a great reflection. And there are other notable mentions. Unfortunately, we can't get into all of them now, but Jazakallah khair, please keep them coming. Okay, so with that, let's get directly into verse number 12, which is where we are at now. We had explained verse 11 last time, and there was a follow-up. I sent an audio clarification for the questions that were raised about verse number 11. I hope all of you have taken the opportunity to listen to that. And now let's go straight into verse number 12. بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. قال ما منعك ألا تسجد إذ أمرتك قال أنا خير منه خلقتني من نار وخلقته من طين. Allah said, what prevented you from prostrating yourself when I commanded you to do so? He said, I am better than he. You created me from fire and him you created from clay. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asks Iblis the question, which the situation, brought forth about how dare he not comply with the divine commandment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This was a very strange thing for there to be a lack of compliance to a divine command. And the answer that Iblis actually gives here in this verse is quite shocking. And Ibn Kathir, rahimahullah ta'ala, in his tafsir mentions that the answer is actually even worse than the original sin of refusing to bow down. For the reason for him not bowing, it was the sin of arrogance, right? And this is actually the first, one of the first human or beings that we know about that actually became guilty of this sin of arrogance. Iblis himself, who felt I am better, that he was better than Adam alayhi salam because of his physical composition, because of what he was created with, fire, versus what Adam alayhi salam was created with, clay. So this thinking that I am superior in my physical composition, I am made of superior elements or characteristics or physical traits, and that the other is lesser than me on account of those physical traits, this sounds identical to the philosophy of racism. So actually, Shaitan is one of the first racists that we learn about in the Quran, right? And we also see, clearly from this verse how racism is in fact a full-blown delusion. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the creator of both fire and clay. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the creator of both black and white. He gives no recognition, no weight whatsoever to such consideration, and he literally throws them out, as we see that is what is about to happen to Iblis now. And if you think about the difference between black and white, if you can please just mute yourselves, Jazakallah khair. If everybody could just mute themselves, please. Otherwise, your voice is actually coming in the video. Sisters, if you could please mute yourselves. Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much. So we were saying that how, in fact, racism is in fact a full-blown delusion, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, does not at all take into consideration these physical discrepancies. After all, he is the creator of both of them, right? And physiologically, the difference between black and white simply goes back to how much or how little pigmentation we have in our system. How much melanin you have is what determines how light or dark you are. So, you know, hating on people or considering other people inferior due to their physical appearance is kind of like looking down on people that are shorter than you, looking down on people that have straight hair instead of curly hair, or vice versa. That's literally what it comes down to, because it is all simply a matter of physical difference. So just as absurd as such physical considerations of height or hair type would be for determining superiority, color or the element that we are made up of, whether that is fire or clay, whether a color is black or white, it is as ridiculous to take those considerations, to make them a factor in determining superiority or inferiority. At least we see made that grave mistake of making it an entire basis of compliance versus refusal to the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So focusing on these physical elements is an incorrect focus. Okay, that's what we clearly learn from this verse. And what it does is that it has real consequences. That incorrect focus led Iblis to completely neglect the great honor that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had conferred upon Adam alayhi salam, by the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had created Adam alayhi salam with his own hands, that he had breathed of him into his spirit, that he had commanded the sajda upon his creation, right? So focusing on the wrong thing makes you lose sight of the important thing. This is exactly what happened in the case of Iblis alayhi salam, who was blinded by arrogance that blurred and misled his focus. So the take home for us is what happens when we question the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and use our own logic and become arrogant. And this arrogance really leads to a blindness of obvious realities, and it also leads to overlooking the greatness that may be present in other people in a greater amount than within our own selves. But our arrogance will not allow us to recognize and internalize and learn from the greatness, or the great qualities, the good qualities in other people that we may in fact have benefited from, had we been not so focused on our own superiority and our own arrogance. So this is actually the reason why we are forbidden to make fun of other people, because that also stems from the same place of arrogance that Iblis's refusal to make sajda stemmed from. Because those people who may be making fun of may in fact be better in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but we're unable to see that because of our deviated perception. Now, with regards to the effect of sins, and we always talk about the effects of our actions, the effects of sins upon us, the scholars have commented, and Yahya Emmerich also mentions their comments about what happened to Iblis. And I quote, "When pride first entered Iblis's heart, Allah's anger emboldened the growing blindness in his inner understanding, and he could no longer comprehend or fear the majesty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Thus he became bold and combative." So you see, this is the effect of sin. We always talk about how it is not possible for sin to not leave an impact, to not have an effect. And here in these scholarly comments, we find the impact of those sins, and the growing blindness, a lack of understanding, losing awe of the majesty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and leading to boldness and combativeness in one's own sins, right? So again, to summarize, sins blur our perception. If you're taking notes, this is the thing you would jot down. Sins blur our perception. They take away our ability to see things as they are, which reminds us of the dua, Allahumma arina al-haqqa al-haqqa warzuqna ittiba'a wa arina al-batila batila warzuqna ijtinaba, which means that, oh Allah, show us the truth as the truth and grant us the ability to follow it and show us falsehood as falsehood, and then give us the ability to avoid it. Another great point that we learned that Sheikh Sa'di rahimahullah ta'ala mentions in his tafsir is about the use of what we call qiyas, or analogical or deductive reasoning. I'm sure all of you have heard of qiyas. It's basically used to come up with an Islamic ruling on a subject that does not have an explicit ruling from the Quran or Sunnah, doesn't directly say something is haram or halal. So we use something similar to it. So apply an analogy and then derive the ruling that would apply according to the principles laid out in Quran and Sunnah. So for example, you don't have a text from the Quran and Sunnah on the ruling of cigarettes per se, right? Because cigarettes are not mentioned explicitly in the Quran or Hadith. But you do have the general Quranic principle, which tells us to not throw ourselves into harm's way, to not lead ourselves, damage ourselves. So that principle, that Quranic principle, and we also find that principle from Hadith, scholars used qiyas, or analogical reasoning, to also prohibit cigarettes because of the research that reveals the clearly damaging effects of prolonged nicotine use. However, why are we mentioning this? We're mentioning this because, yes, qiyas is a valid source of coming up with the Islamic position of halal or haram or makruh, etc. We do not use qiyas if a text is already present, okay? One of the mistakes Shaitan made is that he started explaining the reason why he did not bow down, right? And he said that reason was, I'm better than him. He was made of clay, I'm made of fire. So I should not, this command should not be being issued upon the creation of Adam, alayhi salam. However, the text in this case is the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if a command is already there in the Quran and Sunnah, then we do not use our own justification. We do not use our own reasoning, okay? So in addition to Shaitan's rebuttal of superiority, being wrong from a moral perspective, it was grounded in how he felt himself superior. Morally, obviously, that's an incorrect position to take and to adopt arrogance. But Sheikh Sadi mentions that it is also wrong from a qiyas perspective, from you do not use qiyas, and this is how we can apply to us. We do not use qiyas, we do not use reasoning and logical reasoning when the Quran and Sunnah have already issued a ruling, a clear ruling on that subject. So if something is already halal or haram and we have proof from the Quran and Sunnah, then we can't use our reasoning about how to make it okay for us. And if it is haram, okay? So this is actually very relevant to us today, and really important for us to remember, so that qiyas is not misused in the presence of Quranic and Hadith evidence. And also, qiyas is not something that you and I can just do on any issue at any point. It is something that we should seek the guidance of scholars, because it's very easy to misapply qiyas due to our own lack of training and our own lack of experience in the field. So that was an interesting point that we can also learn from verse 12. Okay, let's go on to verse number 13. Verse 13, Allah said, the Arabic first, قال فاهبط منها فما يكون لك أن تتكبر فيها فاخرج إنك من الصاغرين. Verse number 13, Allah said, then get you down from here. It does not behoove you to be arrogant here, so be gone, you will be among the humiliated, okay? Verse number 13, so here comes the clear command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where he is throwing Iblis out of the place that he had previously occupied, stating that there is no place for the arrogant. You are out of place, and in fact, you've lowered yourself forever by claiming superiority. So by claiming superiority, you actually lower yourself in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And superiority was the reason that Iblis cited for his refusal and his disobedience, but that in fact became the reason for him becoming inferior, for him becoming humiliated and abased for all time to come. And we have already mentioned this hadith from the Sahih of Imam Muslim in previous classes, which means on the authority of Abu Hurairah radiallahu anh, that the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, Sadaqah does not decrease property, and Allah increases the honor of him who forgives. And no one will humble himself for Allah except that Allah raises his status. Allah raises the status of those who humble themselves for his sake. We see Shaitan did the opposite. He hired himself over the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, claimed superiority for himself, did not comply to that which he should have complied with, and therefore he became degraded and abased and humiliated. So, every time we elevate ourselves above Allah's words, every time we sin, that's essentially what we are doing, right? We are going around Allah's command to comply and to obey, and we are committing a certain sin, and every sin is committed with justification. There's some justification that most people give to themselves before committing a certain sin. But what we are essentially doing when we justify our sins is that we are going around and above the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, putting our word above our justification above his command. And this is how we actually lower ourselves. This is how we decrease our weight in the scales with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because realize there's always a reason. There's always a justification. There's always an answer to everything, right? And what these justifications really do for us and why we use them, even though logically what we're saying right now makes perfect sense, but practically we continue to justify our misactions, our sinfulness, because they serve to smooth over those pangs of conscience which inconveniently rise up to trouble us at that moment of the committing of that sin, especially when the sin is new and we're doing it for the first time. But what we are in fact doing is distancing ourselves from the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, just like Shaitan did distance himself from Allah's mercy when he failed to comply with Allah's commandments. So this gets us into the linguistic meaning of Iblis, right? Iblis is the name of Shaitan, and it comes from the word balasa, which means turida in Arabic. And turida in Arabic means that he was expelled or evicted or cast out, because Shaitan is the one who has been cast out of the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Iblis actually linguistically has a plural. It has two plurals, and sometimes in Arabic you will have one word and it will have more than one plural. Iblis, the plural of Iblis is Abalis or Abalisa. They're both plurals of Iblis, and it basically means the one who is evicted or cast out from the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Another related meaning is from the root word abalasa. Okay, this is also related to Iblis. You can hear it in the sound. And abalasa means one who despaired. Okay, and in fact, the Quran uses this word or its derivations to mean someone who despairs, or to talk about people who are in a state of despair. For example, in Surah Rum, verse number 12, وَيَوْمَ تَقُومُ السَّاعَةُ يُبْلِسُ الْمُجْرِمُونَ, right? On the day when the hour is established, the guilty will stagger along in despair. So you have this usage, this meaning of the word to mean despair. Okay, so Shaitan is often described as someone who has despaired of the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You also have an example of this meaning in Surah Az-Zukhruf, verse 75. لا يفتر عنهم وهم فيه مبلسون, talking about the punishment of the fire of hell. Its torment won't be lightened for them, even as they're engulfed by sadness and despair. Okay, so sometimes you will find words in the Quran that are related to the word Iblis because they share a common origin and have these meanings of being evicted from Allah's mercy, being distanced from Allah's mercy, and also from being in a state of despair. Okay, so that was a little linguistic knowledge about Iblis and and that name as it applies to him. What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say in this verse number 13? قَالَ فَاهْبِطْ مِنْهَا. He said, so go down from it, right? From it, min, from, ha, it. Now, what does it refer to? Where is Shaitan being cast out of? Where is he being evicted from physically? So Ibn Kathir, rahimahullah, he mentioned in his tafsir two possible meanings for this. It may refer to the manzila, or the place, or the place of nearness and honor that Iblis had occupied before that, when he had been obedient and worshipful. So ha minha, from it, may refer to that rank or that place of nearness. So he's being evicted from that place of nearness, or it may refer to Jannah, to paradise itself, right? The abode of the pure and the righteous, where there is no place for the arrogant and the haughty, who are full of themselves. It is Jahannam that is full of them, right? Paradise is not a place that has room for the haughty and the arrogant. And this is why we know that and those that are haughty and arrogant do not have a place in paradise. Therefore, it's something we need to be really, really careful about, including looking down on people, because sometimes it can come upon us. This we may have tinges of arrogance and not realize it. And one of the ways of being arrogant is when you look down upon someone else as inferior. That is the essence of arrogance, regardless of what reason makes you feel that way. Okay, whether it is physical reason of superiority, as Iblis claimed, as racists claim, or whether it is a feeling of spiritual superiority, which is one of the ways that Shaitan tries to get into the people that are practicing or trying to be righteous. He tries to make them fall into the sin of arrogance by making them conscious of their superiority in terms of righteousness over others, right? That is something that we can never claim for ourselves, and immediately seek refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala if those kinds of feelings begin to suggest themselves. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only one who is aware of our true reality. We don't even know, where we stand with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So humility is the way of the attitude of the believer. Okay, let's go on to verse number 14. Verse 14. قَالَ أَنظِرْنِي إِلَى يَوْمِ يُبْعَثُونَ. So Shaitan replied, give me respite till the day they shall be raised. Give me respite until the day of judgment. Now, this request shows at least two things. First of all, he is aware that there is a day of judgment, okay? So he believes in that day, right? He knows there is a day of judgment. And secondly, he asks Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give him respite, requesting, asking permission, asking for time, which means that he is, by that request, admitting that he is still in the full grasp and control of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Even though he is essentially seeking permission to disobey him, he realizes that cannot be done unless Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants me permission. Sayyid Qutb rahimahullah ta'ala in his tafsir writes about this, about Iblis. He was perfectly aware that the one who was giving the orders was his Lord, who had created him and who had control over his destiny, as also of the destiny of the whole universe, end quote. So Iblis cannot even rebel, he cannot even sin and lead others astray unless and until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives him permission to do so, and it is essentially this respite, this time that he's asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for in order to unleash his evil purpose. What we realize and learn from this is that nothing can happen in the universe, not even evil or good, without Allah's permission. It is his universe and his laws. apply. And we also learn an important fundamental belief from this is that simply because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has allowed certain things to happen, or willed certain things, allowed, permitted certain things, doesn't mean that He is pleased by those things. Obviously, Allah is not pleased with the evil of shaitan or evil in general, right? But He has allowed them for a certain purpose, for a certain greater wisdom or purpose that He wills to accomplish through that allowance. Another really important thing, and this directly applies to all of us, is that a take-home lesson is that knowledge is not enough for obedience to naturally follow. Yes, knowledge is essential in order to obey. Knowledge is essential in order to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala properly, to act and react properly to His commands. So yes, while it is necessary, it is not an immediate guarantor of obedience, right? Qutb again mentions about Iblis in this context, neither his knowledge of God nor his belief in God's existence and attributes were of any benefit to Iblis. He believed in Allah. He knew about the attributes of Allah. He affirmed the attributes of Allah. This is why he knows he cannot do what he was intending to do without His permission. He affirms a day of judgment because he is asking for respite until the day of judgment. Yet all this knowledge did not bring about compliance and obedience to Allah's command. So it is, worth thinking about, what is it that actually makes you comply? What is it that actually makes you submit to Allah's words, right? That is some food for thought. That is something to think about, something that we can answer on our own, inshallah. Okay, let's look at verse number 15. Verse 15. قَالَ إِنَّكَ مِنَ الْمُنظَرِينَ. Verse number 15, Allah said, you are granted respite. So it's a short verse. Basically, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala here grants him permission, as we said, in line with His wisdom, to test human beings, to distinguish between the good and the bad and the best. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants him permission for the purpose of creation is to test which of us are the best in actions, right? And this tafsir we get directly from the Quran, from Surah Al-Mulk, verse 2, that we are encouraged to read every night. الذي خلق الموت والحياة ليبلوكم أيكم أحسن عملا وهو العزيز الغفور, right? The one who created death and life in order to test you, to see which of you is the best in actions, and He is Al-Aziz, the mighty, Al-Ghafur, the all-forgiving, right? So this is the purpose of the creation of death and life, to see which of us is the best in actions. Like Allah has already told us, right? We are being tested, right? Okay, let's look at verse number 16. قَالَ فَبِمَا أَغْوَيْتَنِي لَأَقْعُدَنَّ لَهُمْ صِرَاطَكَ الْمُسْتَقِيمِ. Verse number 16, Satan said, since you have caused me to come to this end, I shall surely sit in ambush for them on your straight path. Okay, now here we want to begin to learn and continue to learn about the mentality of Iblis in order to not think like him. Okay, so we're going to begin from this verse onwards to learn Iblis's mentality with the purpose of not falling into thinking like him, because that's what he wants us to do, so that we can act like him as well, right? He continues to justify his rebellion, right? He continues to justify his rebellion. And how does he do that? فَبِمَا أَغْوَيْتَنِي. Bima, ba here is sababiyya, right? Because of what? Because of the fact that you have led me astray. You let me go astray. Basically, he's blaming Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the way that he is behaving, for the way that he is reacting. He's justifying his rebellion that he started back in verse 12 by saying that, I'm better than him. He's continuing to justify his refusal to bow down. That you are the one who has made me gone astray. You did it to me. You made me do it. So I'm going to go all in and really lead them astray, right? That's what he's essentially saying here, and we'll explain exactly what he said. The take home here is blaming others for your own faults and sins and shortcomings is in fact satanic. This is what Shaitan did. He disobeyed. The mistake emanated from his side, but he's justifying himself by blaming the other. In this case, he's blaming Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? We don't want to behave like this. This is the take home. We do not want to blame others, offload guilt to others, when we make a mistake, when we commit a sin, because this is satanic behavior. It's easy to stay bad. It's easy to stay disobedient. It's easy to stay rebellious when you can offload your guilt onto someone or something else and thus never have to take responsibility for it, right? This is why this type of mentality is one of the greatest blockers to rectification and self-improvement and self-correction, right? As long as there's a way that I can blame someone else, it takes away the pain and burden of having to take responsibility for it myself. There's actually a whole psychology of blame. We're not going to get into it right now. But I was reading The Principles of Success. It's a great book that talks about the characteristics of excessively, supremely successful people. And one of the things it mentions is that successful people, and this is a, non-Muslim authors, and it's, written from a worldly perspective. One of the things it mentions about people who become extremely rich, extremely successful, extremely prosperous, successful in whatever they do, is that they never blame others for their mistakes, for their situation. They take full responsibility for their mistakes, because then you have to correct it. And you then become the instrument of your success, right? Because you take charge and you change it. And we believe that by Allah's permission, when we do that, by Allah's help and tawfiq, when we do that, this begins the path of tawbah. This begins the path of improving ourselves. Also, another thing we learn about Shaitan's mentality and psychology from this verse is that being vengeful is also satanic. Essentially, he's saying that, okay, now I am going to, sit and lie in ambush for them upon the straight path, right? He's so vengeful. He's so desirous of intiqam, of revenge, right? Essentially, he's so enraged that he responds with that rage by saying, I'm going to lurk in ambush for them along your straight path and pounce upon them at every opportunity that I can, so as to take them off of that straight path. Think about how much hatred you have to have for someone, towards someone, to desire, bring them down with all your mind and soul. And you live literally, you've asked for respite and life and time. You're living literally just to lead them astray, and not just for from the person that caused you to be in the situation that made you vengeful, but from their children, and not just for a generation or two, but not for 100 years or two, but forever, and for all time to come, until the day of judgment. This is next level grudge. You can't even call it a grudge. This is next level hatred and jealousy and envy and rage. All of those things are satanic. Okay, to have these grudges or hatred or jealousy or envy or rage towards someone, these are satanic tendencies. We don't want to have these towards anyone. Want to avoid them as much as possible. And if we fall into them, then to seek Allah's assistance in ridding ourselves of them, because we don't want to harbor any satanic tendencies, which only lead us to then can possibly lead us to then act upon them, which will make us act shaitan-like, right? And not like a righteous believers. Also, another related point to this is that after we know shaitan's feelings towards us, which we just listed, how, in what universe does it make sense to then follow his lead? How then does it make any sense to follow the path he calls us to, which is taking us off the straight path, right? So to summarize, these feelings of arrogance or envy or revenge we may have at any point, realize they came out in Iblis himself at a certain point, as that certain event of the command to prostrate is what elicited those feelings of arrogance and envy that came out at that point. And these satanic tendencies exist in human nature as well. We all have potential tendencies that may be elicited by certain events. And so we need to be really careful around those triggers and become alerted to our behavior and feelings when we're around triggers that elicit feelings of arrogance, feelings of pride, feelings of envy, or holding a grudge or desiring revenge, etc., right? Because shaitan wants us to feed into those feelings. It is satanic to feed into those feelings and then to come out and let those feelings control your behavior and change you into someone that shaitan is pleased with, because then we would be acting the way he is acting, right? So in these moments, we seek refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We say, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, right? Whenever we have feelings that would be displeasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we seek refuge in Allah, because those feelings are pleasing to shaitan, right? So we seek refuge in Allah from shaitan at that point. And also to try to remember if we can, to the best of our ability in those moments, about what happened to shaitan when he gave into those feelings, how they were what brought about his downfall, how they then dictated the way he reacted to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the way they have resulted in the type of akhirah that he's going to have, right? So we don't want any of that to happen to us, right? So that should immediately just prompt us to retreat into istighfar, to retreat away from those feelings into the refuge of istighfar, to protect ourselves from those tendencies which would distance us from Allah and get us closer to shaitan. I mean, who would want to be close to shaitan anyway, right? So know your enemy. Okay, these verses are a lot of information, a lot of knowledge on shaitan is being given to us in these verses about who he is, why he acted the way he did, what prompted him, what he's planning, what he has planned for us, right? Know your enemy. This is what Allah is telling us about him. The Quran does not contain any unnecessary information. There is no verse that is extra. There is no verse that it would have been okay if it wasn't there. There's no such thing, right? Every single verse is important and essential for our guidance. That's why it is there. Part of the knowledge Allah has given us, part of the revelation he has gifted and blessed us with, is he has exposed our enemy and his tactics, right? So we must know how shaitan seeks to reel us in through those same tendencies that brought him down, literally, right? Okay, let's look at verse 17, verse number 17. ثم لآتينهم من بين أيديهم ومن خلفهم وعن أيمانهم وعن شمائلهم ولا تجد أكثرهم shakirin. Okay, verse number 17. Then I will come upon them from the front and from the rear and from the right and from their left, and you will not find most of them thankful. Okay, again, here is Iblis's battle plan. His battle plan is to go all in, and to be completely overwhelming in his onslaught. I will fall upon them, attack them from all sides, from every side, to reach my goal of getting them off of your straight path, right? And I'm going to be very successful, right? He's so sure of his tactics, of how effective they're going to be. This ayah, actually, this verse really tells us one of the things that make Iblis who he truly is, and that is his persistence in sin, right? We can see how he is persisting in the mistake that got him out of the place that he was in. It's one thing to sin out of weakness and temptation, even if you have knowledge, to succumb to weakness, to succumb to the temptation, than to be regretful and repentant later on. But it is a whole different scenario to be persistent and to insist on one's sin and rebellion. And you can hear the clear haughtiness in his language, how he's so sure of the result. He says, وَلَا تَجِدُ أَكْثَرَهُمْ شَاكِرِينَ. You're not going to find most of them grateful, right? So sin and arrogance go together, because sinning is essentially saying you know better than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I don't need to stay obedient. I can become sinful and, because of whatever reason that I give to myself and justify that with. Now, further, what Shaitan goes on to, state is that the one that you're expelling me for, the one you're expelling me over, you're going to find that most of his progeny are not even going to be grateful to you. The majority of them will fall into my trap, and I'm going to try to entrap them. How? The tafsir mentions that the ways that Shaitan tries to entrap us is through instilling doubts. He will try to instill doubts about our akhirah. He will try to make us desirous of this world. He will try to make us doubt, about various matters relating to our deen. He will tempt us with sin. So, basically beautifying all that is truly evil, beautifying that which is harmful to us, making it attractive and appealing to us. That is, one of the ways that he operates. And to make those things which are good for us in our akhirah, that have true khair for us, to make them appear difficult. Okay, this is one of the basic mode of operation of shaitan. So need to recognize that, and this is something that's going to come up again. And so one of his goals is to overwhelm and attack us in such a way that we lose our ability to be grateful, right? This is what he's essentially saying. He's giving up the battle plans, giving up the blueprint, basically. He's going to attack us in a way that's going to overwhelm us and make us lose the ability to be grateful. And this is one of the end results he highlights. It's really interesting how, this is kind of like one of the end results that he is highlighting, that I'm going to do this. I'm going to attack them from all sides. And what's going to happen at the end as a result of my attacks is that you're not going to find most of them to be grateful. And I'm going to go in on the right and the left and the front and behind them. And the result is going to be, a lack of gratitude. You're not going to have grateful servants. Imam Bukhari, rahimahullah ta'ala, he's recorded a dua in his Adab al-Mufrad. So this is not recorded in his Sahih. So it's a second tier Sahih, or second level of authenticity. And this is one of the du'as that, you may make in the morning and the evening. And just for brevity's sake, I'll give you only the translation on the authority of Ibn Abbas radiallahu anh. And the dua essentially means, "Oh Allah, I ask you for your pardon and good health in this world and the next." And actually the Arabic may help you remember if this is a dua that you're already making, so I'll mention it. Allahumma inni as'aluka al-afwa wal-afiya fi dunya wal-akhirah. Allahumma inni as'aluka al-afwa fi dini wa ahli. واستر عوراتي وآمن روعاتي واحفظني من بين يدي ومن خلفي وعن يميني وعن يساري ومن فوقي وأعوذ بك أن أغتال من تحتي. You'll find slight variations. But basically, the supplication of dua is, "Oh Allah, I ask you for pardon and good health in this world and the next. Oh Allah, I ask you for good health in my deen and my family. Veil my faults and calm my fears." It's a beautiful dua if you think about its meanings. Veil my faults and calm my fear. Guard me from before me, behind me, on my right and my left and above me. I seek refuge with you from unexpected destruction from beneath me. So you see, in the dua, there is this supplication to have protection from all sides. And remember, Shaitan had said that he was going to attack us from all sides. So we seek Allah's protection and refuge from all sides. So it's a beautiful dua, and inshallah we can make it available in the WhatsApp group, so you'll know exactly what the Arabic is, and the translation, I'll give the reference as well. So, through exposing the intention of Iblis and his plan against us, in very clear terms, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has bestowed one of his greatest favors upon us, right? Because one of the most powerful, things that an enemy has over another is the element of surprise. So here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has completely exposed shaitan, the most powerful and all-knowing, merciful Ar-Rahman. Our Lord has warned us against what would distance us from his mercy, right? And it's really difficult to protect ourselves from your enemies if you don't know how they're going to act and how they're going to attack, right? So this element of surprise, which is one of the most crucial war tactics for winning, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took that away from shaitan by exposing him and telling us how he's going to pursue his plan, right? So yes, Allah did give shaitan the respite and the time that he asked for, but he took away that element of surprise so that we know how he's going to attack. So this actually gives us a great advantage over him, to know what he does and how he does it, and that we are in fact his target and what his goals are and how he targets us, right? And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us how we can easily seek refuge and protection. Just say, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Just remember Allah, just that, subhanAllah, that, simple cure and weapon of dhikr, which is remembrance, literally remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at the moment of committing sin will be sufficient to not commit that sin. Remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when some temptation is made tempting to us will be enough to discourage us and dissuade us, and perhaps even lose the taste of that potential temptation that we may have had before remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So succumbing to shaitan after Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us about him, exposed him, and told us how to protect ourselves through dhikr, really walking right into his trap after knowing about his mode of operation is really not befitting. And while yes, all of us make mistakes and fall into sin, really important to just get up and seek refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is the best a way to show gratitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? For this gift that he has given us through the knowledge of these beautiful verses of the Quran. Okay, I think we have time for maybe one more verse. Let's look at verse number 18. Verse number 18. Okay, one more verse. قال اخرج منها مذءوما مدحورا لمن تبعك منهم لأملأن جهنم منكم أجمعين. And this is actually a great verse to conclude with. It kind of concludes that conversation between Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Iblis, which means Allah said, go away from here disgraced and banished. I shall fill hell with all those that follow you. Okay, so verse 18 here in the Arabic, you see قال اخرج, and he said, and Allah said, and the word قال اخرج means get out. Literally, that's what it means. He said, get out. From it, مذءوما مدحورا. I just want to go a little bit into these words. مذءوما is translated as condemned or despised or disgraced. Okay, so this is in fact what shaitan was reduced to in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when he claimed the opposite of that for himself, when he claimed arrogance for himself and was arrogant and in sinning against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then because of that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reduced him in his sight, right? And madhura, distant from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, far from him, far from his mercy, far from his khair. You also find for the meaning of madhura, someone who is disowned or rejected or banished, cast out altogether. And here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that whoever follows you, you and everyone who follows you and follows your path and takes your lead, there's lam al-tawkid here, okay? If you look at the verse, قال اخرج منها مذءوما مدحورا لمن تبعك منهم لأملأن جهنم. So before أملأن, there's lam, right? لأملأن, which means I shall surely. It's not like I will fill hell with you and all those who follow, but I shall surely fill hell with you and all those that follow. So this lam is there for extra emphasis on the fact that Allah will definitely do this to him and all those who follow him. This is going to be their inevitable, unescapable destination. Now it's interesting how the verse concludes with, verse 18 concludes with ajma'in, with all of you, like all together, right? All those that follow you. So, you know, the sense is that everyone who used to be in the same company in this world, Shaitan and his company, if you follow his lead, it is like you're in the company of Shaitan, right? You're taking his lead. And so there will be like company in the hereafter, right? So the akhirah is such a place where like company is gathered together. Hell, after all, is the abode where all the sinners are gathered together. Jannah is the place where all righteous believers are gathered together. So, you know, the overwhelming sins and, you know, rejection from which people of Jahannam, people of the fire, never repented, rather persisted altogether in their disobedience and rebellion, acted just like Shaitan, essentially, right? The way he did. So that has emulating his behavior, acting the way he acted, right? Sinning and then continuing in sin, becoming arrogant and then not repenting, but rather furthering, going on in that attitude has then also landed them in a common destination, right? The worst destination whose horrors are beyond imagination. And, you know, if you think about peer pressure and you think about some of the sins that are committed, many sins are committed together. Yes, some sins are committed privately, but in other situations, it becomes easier to sin, especially the bold sins that we are uncomfortable doing by ourselves because they're new to us or they're just too big or we've never done them before. They become easier to do when they're done with other people who are doing it. And this is one of the reasons we're not supposed to talk about our sins, because if you expose the sin that you did alone, and it becomes known to others who may also have done it, they may share that information, then the sin feels belittled. It doesn't feel so bad when you find out that others are also doing it, right? So just like sins have an increased enjoyment when they are done together, they have a communal pleasure and a communal taste when done in like company. Well, so does hell have its own taste and punishment. It is the taste of punishment and torment. So again, one of the goals, and this is what we conclude with, one of the goals of Quranic study that we mentioned is to give us, to empower us with an akhirah perspective so that we can begin to look at our actions from how they will feel in the akhirah. Begin to look at our actions in a way that we will actually be looking at them, from a day of judgment perspective. So regardless of how good the sin feels now, the real question is, how will it feel then? So inshallah, with that, we conclude Surah Al-A'raf up to verse 18 for today. If there are any questions, actually, we do have about 4 minutes remaining. So we'll end here. Subhanallah wa bihamdika la ilaha illa ant nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. And we do have a few minutes for question and answers. If there are any, you may type them up in the chat.
Assalamu alaikum, sister. I had a question.
Sure.
Oh, am I the only one?
Sure, go right ahead.
You said, is there somebody else?
No, it's you, sister. Are you Sister Ayan?
No, it's Sister Pauline.
Okay, Sister Pauline. Go ahead, Sister Pauline.
All right. You said, if I'm correct, if you expose your sins to somebody else and somebody else also has that sin, does that make the sin less?
Oh, that's a great question. It doesn't decrease the original enormity of the sin. It makes it feel less weighty in the person's eyes, because it's like you're sharing the burden of the sin. It feels less of a big deal when other people are doing it. So it's not that the sin has decreased in its enormity. The sin
Right.
is still a sin. Something that is haram is still haram. It just feels less bad when you know that someone else is also doing it. So it just gets easier to do. We feel more emboldened in like company, and it takes an edge off the guilt. But it doesn't impact in any way the original status of the sin. If it's haram, it's haram. That does not change whether everyone is doing it or one person is doing it.
I thank you for answering that.
Okay, let me go into the chat. And the question is, what if you exposed all your sins to your spouse before you knew that was wrong, and now your spouse uses that against you all the time, even though it was before Islam? That's a horrible situation to be in. Someone needs to give advice to that spouse. We never ever are supposed to make someone else, we're never supposed to hold someone about their, hold someone's sins against them after they have repented. So the question clearly states that this was before Islam, right? So Islam and becoming Muslim, as we know, removes all the sins of the past, right? So once you become Muslim, you come into Islam as with a clean slate. So if Allah has cleaned your slate, then how can any other human being, still look at you through those, through that lens of those past sins which you have already repented from? So this is completely against the Islamic etiquette, and the spouse should be reminded of the fact that Islam removes all sins, and coming into Islam forgives all sins. So you literally have a clean slate, and they should not be mentioned, just as we would not want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to mention our sins. Wallahu ta'ala alam. Okay, there is another question about, is there any case in which it could be beneficial to share your sin with someone else, like telling your kids about mistakes in order to warn them so as to not do what we did? Okay, so inshallah, this last question I will answer in the WhatsApp group, because it is exactly 6 p.m. and I don't want to inconvenience anyone by going beyond. So thank you for your question, and inshallah I will address that in the WhatsApp group. Jazakallah khair. With that, we conclude. Subhanallah wa bihamdika, la ilaha illa ant, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.